The Grand Convocation Hall of Valkyrian Station was the most magnificent structure humanity had ever been permitted to enter, and also, as of today, the last place on record where humans would be welcomed. Ambassador Serafina Voss stood at the curved edge of the observation tier, her hands folded behind her back, her jaw perfectly still. She had practiced stillness. Years on the diplomatic circuit had turned it into armor. Behind her, the rotating assembly of the Galactic Council filled every seat in the tiered amphitheater, their bioluminescent sigils pulsing in the low-spectrum light. At the center of the chamber, First Arbiter Dravik of the Sindari Collective rose to full height, his four arms extending in the traditional gesture of absolute declaration. The translation nodes embedded in the walls hummed to life. Humanity, Dravik began, his voice carrying the weight of 7,000 years of unbroken galactic governance, has been assessed. You have been weighed against the accord of civilized worlds. You have been measured by the criteria of collective advancement. The Council has reached its unanimous conclusion. Serafina did not blink. Earth and all affiliated human settlements are hereby severed from the galactic network. Trade routes, hyperlane access, medical data exchange, gravitational mapping privileges, and cultural transmission protocols will be revoked within 60 planetary rotations. The humans will not be destroyed. They will simply be excluded. The chamber erupted in the varied sounds of 31 alien species expressing agreement. Clicks, resonant hums, cascading color shifts among the photosensitive Valori delegates, and the low vibrational applause of the stone-bodied Ketheri. Dravik waited for silence, then looked directly at Serafina. Does the human ambassador have a response? Serafina Voss was 39 years old. She had grown up in the orbital habitats of Callisto, watched her mother negotiate asteroid mining rights, and spent 11 years learning 17 alien languages. She had never once, in any official capacity, lost her composure. She smiled. It was not a diplomatic smile. It was the kind of smile that belonged on the face of someone who had just been told the rules of a game they had already decided not to play. The Council's decision is noted, she said. No protest. No plea. No detailed counterargument referencing Earth's contributions to galactic infrastructure or humanity's disproportionate role in 3 recent interstellar conflicts that had saved Sindari colony worlds. Just noted. First Arbiter Dravik's secondary eyes, the ones that registered threat, opened involuntarily. He had expected tears. Or outrage. The Valori had wept during their exclusion hearing 4 centuries ago. The Ketheri had shattered 17 council chairs. Humans were supposed to be emotional. Every psychological profile filed over 40 years of observation said so. That is all? Dravik asked. That's all, Serafina confirmed. She tilted her head slightly as if she were considering adding something, then appeared to decide against it. We'll need the official documentation transmitted to Earth's current Council of Delegates. Standard encryption will do. We're familiar with the format. She turned and walked toward the exit corridor. Her aide, a young man named Jed Okafor, fell into step beside her. He was 26, freshly posted, and had gone entirely pale beneath his dark complexion. He waited until they were through the first pressure seal before he whispered, "Ambassador, what just happened?" "We got expelled," Serafina said. "And we're just leaving?" "We are, yes." "Shouldn't we argue?" Peel. The Valori took their case to secondary arbitration for 30 years before. The Valori wanted back in, Serafina said simply. She stepped into the transit pod and selected the docking level. The pod accelerated silently through the station's internal transit network. "We don't." Jed stared at her. "We don't?" Serafina looked out the transparent wall of the pod at the interior architecture of Valkyrian Station, at its soaring vaulted corridors and the alien commerce moving through them. She had always found it beautiful. She still did. 6 months ago, before this hearing was even announced, Director General Huang convened a quiet review. Not publicized, not logged in the standard diplomatic record. She pulled in every xenoeconomist, every independent infrastructure analyst, every hyperlane physicist who owed Earth a favor, and she asked them one question. If we were removed from the galactic network tomorrow, what would happen to us? And? The answer was complicated, Serafina said. But the short version was, we would be fine. Better than fine, possibly. Jed was silent for a long moment as the pod descended. And the Council doesn't know that. The Council, Serafina said, has never once in 40 years of dealing with us actually studied us. They collected data. They filed reports. They ran us through their standard metrics, The same metrics developed to assess species that evolved in stable galactic clusters with shared biological origins and compatible economic frameworks. She paused. Humans don't fit those metrics. We never did. The metrics just said we were deficient. The pod stopped. The doors opened onto the docking bay. Ahead, the Earth diplomatic vessel, the quiet, utilitarian INS Perseverance, sat waiting. So we grin and leave, Jed said slowly. We grin and leave, Serafina confirmed. And then we get to work. She walked up the boarding ramp without looking back at the station. Behind her, through the reinforced viewport of Valkyrian's outer hull, 31 alien civilizations were celebrating an exclusion they were certain would be the end of humanity's interstellar chapter. Aboard the Perseverance, the message to Director General Huang was already composing itself in Serafina's mind. It is done. Begin Phase 1. She would word it, she decided, with something close to enthusiasm. The journey from Valkyrian Station to Earth took 22 days through the Galactic Network's registered hyperlanes. Dr. Marin Solis had timed it 47 times in her career as a xenocartographer. 22 days. She could recite the waypoints in her sleep. Valkyrian to Helix Relay to the Aurelian Exchange, the Exchange to Threshold Node 12, Threshold Node 12 home. The INS Perseverance was not using any of those routes. We just bypassed the Helix Relay entirely, said Navigator Kate Ferris from the forward console. He had the slightly stunned expression of a man who had trained his whole life to use authorized routes and was now being asked to do something that had no authorization because no one had ever thought to authorize it. That is correct, said Dr. Solis. She was seated cross-legged on the floor of the navigation bay, which was not standard practice, surrounded by printed maps, actual paper maps, a personal affectation she had never apologized for, and 4 tablets running different gravitational modeling programs simultaneously. We are, as of right now, completely off the Galactic Network map, Ferris said. Also correct. Is that legal? Solis looked up at him over the rim of her glasses. There is no law against traveling through space. The Galactic Network's hyperlane designations are a courtesy system, not a physical constraint. The lanes are registered for priority access and safety data exchange. We have been removed from the network. We no longer need to follow their courtesy system. She looked back at her maps. We are, however, still subject to the physics of spacetime, which I find more compelling than their administrative guidelines. Ferris turned back to his console and said nothing for approximately 90 seconds. How do you know this route is safe? I mapped it, Solis said. 17 years ago. Before I took the posting with Earth's diplomatic corps. I was doing independent xenocartography for the Solis-Fenwick Gravitational Survey, funded by the University of New Nairobi. We mapped approximately 340,000 light-years of ungoverned space over 4 years using a second-hand survey vessel and a great deal of what my partner Fenwick called professional stubbornness. And you found routes. We found extraordinary routes, Solis said. Faster than the network's registered lanes in many cases, because the registered lanes were designed for the common biological and technological profile of the founding species. They were optimized for ships with Sindari-derived propulsion systems, which is what every Galactic Network vessel uses by treaty. She held up a paper map. The route traced across it was annotated in 3 colors of ink. Human ships use a propulsion derivative that we developed independently before we joined the network. The Sindari always considered it inferior. It is not inferior. It is different. And different routes and different propulsion geometries means different optimal paths. Ambassador Serafina Voss entered the navigation bay quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. She set one beside Dr. Solis and stood looking at the paper maps with an expression of quiet appreciation. How long to Earth on this route? She asked. 9 days, Solis said. Ferris turned around again. 9 days? The standard route is 22. Yes, Solis agreed. We have been using the standard route for 40 years, Ferris said. Yes, Solis agreed again with slightly more patience. There was a long silence. Ferris turned back to his console, processed this information, and then let out a breath that seemed to contain within it the compressed weight of 40 years of unnecessary travel time. How many other routes like this do you have? In this region of space, 11 confirmed and 4 provisional, Solis said. Across the broader territories that the Galactic Network considers registered space, I have 2,847 confirmed independent routes and approximately 9,000 provisional. Globally, with the survey data pooled from the 16 independent xenocartography programs that Earth has been quietly funding since we joined the network, We have mappings covering roughly 60% of the accessible galaxy. Serafina sipped her tea. The Council's decision to exclude us removed our obligation to use their lane system, she said to Ferris. It also removed our obligation to pretend we didn't have an alternative. Ferris stared at the navigational display, at the route they were currently traveling, at the empty space that the Galactic Network had never bothered to register because it had never occurred to them that anyone would want to. Then he said, slowly and with great feeling, "They have no idea what they just did." "No," Serafina agreed. "They do not." On the 7th day of their new route, the Perseverance passed through a region of space that the Galactic Network's charts labeled simply as unmapped, caution advised. Dr. Solis's maps labeled it the Fenwick Corridor, after her late survey partner, and marked it with a small hand-drawn symbol she had never explained to anyone. On the 9th day they broke through into Sol system space 3 days ahead of any standard schedule, and the communication array lit up with transmissions from Earth. Director General Huang Liwei's face appeared on the primary screen. She was 61 years old, white-haired, and had the look of someone who had just received exactly the news she had planned to receive. "Ambassador Voss," she said. "I trust the hearing went as anticipated." "Precisely as anticipated, Director General," Serafina said. Huang nodded. "Then it is time. The full council is convening. I believe you have some thoughts to share." Serafina Voss set down her tea. "Several," she said. "Starting with the routes." Dr. Solis, still cross-legged on the floor among her paper maps, allowed herself a very small, very private smile. The real work, she thought, was only now beginning. And it was, she had to admit, exactly the kind of work she had spent 17 years preparing for without ever being quite sure she would be allowed to do it. Now no one could stop her. That was, she reflected, a rather wonderful thing. The building had no official name in any Galactic Network registry, which was appropriate, since it did not officially exist in any Galactic Network registry. It occupied a full level of Callisto Habitat 7's industrial ring, had been filed under long-term material storage, non-commercial in the Habitat Authority's records for 11 years, and was watched over by a retired cargo coordinator named Bohai Rin who had a fondness for strong coffee and a deep professional aversion to wasted space. On the 61st day after the exclusion decree, 1 day after the network's revocation protocols formally took effect, Director General Huang arrived with a delegation of 12 people and asked Bohai Rin to open the facility. "About time," Bohai said, and produced a key that he wore on a plain metal chain around his neck. The warehouse door opened. The lights came on. Dr. Yemisi Adeyemi, Chief Science Advisor to the Earth Council of Delegates, had been in many large rooms in her career. She had stood in the Grand Convocation Hall of Valkyrian Station. She had walked the kilometer-long main corridor of the Ketheri Collective's Orbital Administrative Center. She had once attended a summit on a Valori worldship whose interior approximated the surface area of a small moon. This was different. The warehouse contained hardware. Thousands of units, stacked and catalogued with the meticulous precision that Bohai Rin apparently applied to everything. But it was not the quantity that stopped her breath. It was the nature of the hardware. Every piece was a prototype. Every prototype was something that the Galactic Network's technology sharing treaty had, in various ways, discouraged, restricted, or outright prohibited. "These are our independent developments," Director General Huang said, walking slowly forward into the space. "Over 40 years of membership in the Galactic Network, humanity continued to research. We signed technology sharing agreements that required us to submit certain categories of innovation for collective review and potential standardization. We complied fully with every agreement we signed. However, we had an extraordinary number of researchers who were very careful about which categories their work fell under." Adeyemi crouched beside a unit that she did not immediately recognize. It was compact, angular, and hummed very slightly. "What is this?" "Dr. Fenorum Bui's atmospheric processing architecture," Huang said. "Designed for rapid cycle terraforming of low-gravity bodies with minimal external energy input. The network's standard terraforming protocols take 40 to 80 years for comparable results. Bui's system achieves comparable results in 11. Adeyemi stared at it. "The network never approved this?" "It was submitted for category review 3 times over 14 years. Each time it was returned with a finding of technological incompatibility with network standards and a recommendation for redesign to conform to established protocols." Huang paused. Dr. Bui declined to redesign it. She filed it under personal research and continued developing it independently. "How many systems like this are there?" Adeyemi asked. Bohai Rin answered from behind them. He had been quietly consulting a tablet. In this facility, 412 discrete technology platforms. In the 7 other facilities operating under similar arrangements across the Sol system and our 3 registered colony worlds, approximately 6,000. The silence in the warehouse was the particular kind of silence that descends when a room full of intelligent people is simultaneously recalculating something they thought they understood. "We have been members of the Galactic Network for 40 years, said Adeyemi slowly. "And in that time, we kept working," Huang said simply. "We have always kept working. It is what we do." The network's technology review process was slow and bureaucratic and optimized for species that considered innovation to be a collective process requiring collective consensus. We found that process deeply frustrating. So our researchers did what frustrated researchers do. She looked around at the stacked prototypes. They went home and kept at it in their own time. Adeyemi stood up. She walked further into the space, looking left and right, reading labels on crates as she went. Propulsion system variants. Agricultural nanoscale platforms. Medical diagnostic arrays. Communication encryption architectures. Power generation systems derived from principles that the Galactic Network had declared theoretically marginal 20 years ago and never revisited. "They expelled us," she said almost to herself, "thinking they were cutting off our access to advanced technology." "Yes," Huang said. "They did not understand that we had been accumulating our own." "They did not consider the possibility," Huang agreed. Their models of technological development assumed that less advanced species joined the network and benefited from access to established technologies. The dynamic of a species that joined, accepted the benefits, and simultaneously continued independent development at high speed was not a scenario they had encountered before. She paused. Or rather, it was a scenario they had dismissed as implausible, because no species had ever done it at the scale we did it. Adeyemi stopped at a unit near the back of the space, covered in a cloth. She looked at Huang. "May I?" Huang nodded. Adeyemi pulled the cloth away. Beneath it was a drive system unlike anything she had seen before. It was small, barely the size of a cargo container, and the geometry of it was subtly wrong in a way that took her several seconds to process. It was wrong the way a shortcut is wrong when you are used to the long road. "Dr. Alina Vasilenko's independent propulsion prototype," Huang said from behind her. "Based on gravitational folding principles that diverge significantly from the Sindari standard." "How significantly?" "In initial trials, it achieved fold efficiency approximately 12 times the network standard." Adeyemi turned slowly. 12 times. 12 times, Huang confirmed. With a projected scaling factor suggesting that larger implementations could achieve considerably more. The warehouse hummed around them, quietly and without drama, 412 revolutionary ideas waiting patiently in the dark for the moment when there was no one left to tell them they needed to conform. That moment had arrived. Adeyemi looked at Director General Huang. "Where do we begin?" Huang smiled. It was, Adeyemi noted, a smile much like the one she had seen on Ambassador Voss's face at Valkyrian Station. A smile that belonged on the face of someone who had known exactly how this story would go, and had been looking forward to this chapter for a very long time. "We begin," Huang said, "by building." The Valori monitoring station at the edge of the Aurelis expanse had been staffed by a rotating crew of 3 for the past 200 years. It was, by any measure, one of the least prestigious postings in the entire Galactic Network. The expanse was empty. Nothing happened in the expanse. The station existed primarily to confirm that nothing was happening in the expanse and to file that confirmation with the network's peripheral monitoring authority every 14 days. Observer Tyneth Vorel had been in this posting for 8 months and had filed 37 consecutive reports of nothing happening, which she had been told was excellent and exemplary work, and which she found deeply unsatisfying. On the 43rd day after the human exclusion took effect, her console registered a signal. Not a ghost signal. Not instrument noise. A clear, structured, directional transmission originating from deep in the expanse and moving outward in a cone that intersected her station's passive receiver array. Tyneth sat up. The signal was not using any registered frequency. It was not using any network standard encryption protocol. The modulation pattern was unlike anything in her reference library. It was, by every formal criterion, an anomalous contact event. She ran the standard anomaly protocol, which required her to document, isolate, attempt decryption, and then report to the network's contact authority within 2 hours. She documented it. She isolated it. She attempted decryption with every tool available to her. On the 7th attempt, Using a decryption approach she had developed herself during what she privately called the extremely boring months, something resolved. The signal was human. Not human in the galactic network contact classification sense, which would have meant a registered Earth diplomatic frequency. Human in the sense that the underlying mathematical structure of the message, once stripped of its novel surface encoding, contained a compression algorithm that she recognized from the technical records of human communication systems. But the surface encoding was entirely new. She stared at it for a long time. Then she did something she had never done in 8 months. She flagged the report as urgent. The response from the network's contact authority took 6 hours. It arrived in the form of senior analyst Dravek Thesis, Sindari, 40 years in the monitoring division, who reviewed her documentation with the practiced skepticism of someone who had seen too many junior observers mistake instrument noise for contact events. Then he saw the signal too. "This is originating from inside the expanse?" he asked. "Deep inside," Tyneth confirmed. "Approximately 400 light-years in. From a region the network charts mark as unmapped and caution flagged. There is nothing 400 light-years into the expanse," Thesis said. "We have survey records going back to the founding period. The survey records cover approximately 8% of the expanse by volume," Tyneth said carefully. "The rest is flagged as low priority unmapped on the basis that preliminary deep scans showed no stellar density worth cataloging." Thesis looked at her. "Are you suggesting the surveys were incomplete?" "I am suggesting," Tyneth said, choosing her words with the precision of someone who understood how careers worked in the network's monitoring division, "that the preliminary scans may not have detected everything worth finding." The signal continued. Over the next 18 hours, additional relay points registered it. It was not one signal. It was a network of signals, a communication architecture spreading across the outer expanse like roots through dark soil. And embedded within it, repeating at intervals, was a short message in clear galactic standard. Thesis translated it himself twice because the first translation seemed implausible. The message read, "Solis Fenwick Independent Survey, now operating as the Meridian Free Passage Network. All vessels traveling through the Aurelis Expanse and associated ungoverned space may request routing assistance and navigational data on this frequency. Safe passage guaranteed. No network affiliation required." He sat with this for a very long time. Then he filed an urgent report upward. The report reached First Arbiter Dravek's desk 32 hours later, at which point 3 additional monitoring stations had registered the signal. 2 independent trading vessels operating in borderland space had already responded to it and received detailed navigational data of a quality that surpassed anything in the network's public charts, and a Kethari mining consortium working the outer belt had quietly inquired whether the Meridian Free Passage Network had route data for the Veshan cluster. It did. Dravek read the reports. He read them twice. He called in his senior advisors. He looked at the map that his cartographic team assembled over the following hours, showing the apparent coverage of human-mapped space as suggested by the signal network's reach. "This is not possible," said one of his advisors. "Mapping this volume of space would require decades of independent survey work." "Yes," said Dravek. "How long have they been doing this?" Dravek looked at the map. At the routes spreading across the spaces the network had never bothered with, had dismissed as marginal, had left in the dark on the assumption that nothing worth finding was there. "Long enough," he said. He thought of Ambassador Serafina Voss at Valkyrian Station. Of her smile. Of the 2 words she had offered in response to humanity's formal exclusion from the civilization he had spent his life maintaining. Noted. He now understood, been warned. He simply had not known how to listen. He asked his advisors to leave and sat alone with the map for a considerable time, watching the human signal network pulse quietly across the dark space his civilization had never seen fit to explore. Thornvale Station had not existed 8 months ago. This was the thing that Galactic Network Trade Consul Siva Dranith kept returning to as her vessel completed its docking approach. 8 months ago, the coordinates at which Thornvale Station now sat had been empty space, 460 light-years from Sol in a region the network had never registered. She had checked the records herself 3 times with increasing disbelief. Empty space. No structure. No signals. Not even a navigational buoy. Now there was a station with the mass profile of a medium-sized Sindari commercial hub, 3 active docking rings, visible running lights in the amber and white frequency that human vessels used, and a docking control signal so cheerful and efficient that her pilot had commented on it unprompted. "Thornvale Control, this is the NSV Valoran Reach Galactic Network Registry requesting docking clearance," her pilot had transmitted. The response had come back in 12 seconds. Welcome to Thornvale, Valoran Reach. You are cleared for Ring 2, Bay 14. Please note that Thornvale Station operates under Meridian Free Zone protocols, which means no cargo inspection, flat-rate docking fee in any recognized currency, and our commissary serves actual food. Bay 14 will be ready in approximately 4 minutes. Have a good approach. Her pilot had looked at her. She had looked at her pilot. Neither of them had said anything, but both of them were thinking about the 3-hour cargo inspection they had endured at the network's Helix relay station 2 weeks prior, which had involved 11 forms and a lengthy discussion about the acceptable moisture content of processed grain shipments. Consul Dranith was not there to appreciate the commissary, though she was beginning to think she would find time for it regardless. She was there because First Arbiter Dravik had sent her, in an official but carefully unannounced capacity, to make what the formal briefing document described as preliminary assessment contact with human independent infrastructure. Which was, she understood, a way of saying, go find out what they have built and whether we can talk to them. The docking bay was functional and clean and staffed by humans who seemed unbothered by the arrival of a network trade consul. A young woman in a plain gray uniform met her at the ramp. She had close-cropped hair and the particular calm of someone who had made a studied decision not to be impressed by credentials. Consul Dranith, she said. I'm Station Coordinator Afia Mensa. Welcome aboard. Can I get you something before we sit down? You were expecting me? Dranith asked. Mensa smiled. We track all inbound vessels from the outer relay network. A Sindari diplomatic configuration on an unregistered approach is noticeable. She paused. We were expecting someone about 2 weeks ago, honestly. You all move slower than we'd estimated. Dranith was not accustomed to being told that her civilization moved slowly. She found, to her surprise, that she was not offended. The observation was delivered without contempt, in the tone of someone noting a factual discrepancy in projected data. I would like to speak with whoever is in charge, Dranith said. That would be Station Director Emre Yilmaz, Mensa said. He is currently in our secondary engineering bay because we are in the middle of installing the 4th power ring, but he set aside time for you. Follow me. They walked through corridors that were, for a structure 8 months old, impressively well finished. Dranith noted the construction materials as she walked, a professional habit. Some were standard, recognizable from network catalogs. Others were not, and she could not immediately identify their source or composition. Director Emre Yilmaz was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, wearing a work suit with the sleeves rolled up and a dusting of something particulate on his forearms. He shook her hand with a grip that was firm without being aggressive, which Dranith's cultural briefing had told her was a human social signal indicating equal standing. Consul, he said. Good to meet you. I'd give you the full tour, but we are in the middle of a construction cycle and I'd prefer not to walk you into a welding operation without advance notice. Coffee? I am not familiar with the beverage, Dranith said. You will be, Yilmaz said, with the confidence of someone who had introduced many beings to coffee and was entirely certain of the outcome. They sat in a small office off the main corridor. Mensa brought 2 cups. The smell was extraordinary. Dranith tried it cautiously and discovered that Yilmaz had been correct. What is this station? Dranith asked directly. She had decided to be direct. The humans she had dealt with in network contexts had been diplomatic to a fault. She had a feeling Yilmaz would prefer plain talk. It's an independent transit hub, Yilmaz said. We're positioned at the convergence of 11 routes in the Meridian network. Ships traveling between the outer ungoverned zones and the mid-sectors can refuel here, restock, transfer cargo, get repairs, and access our navigational data service. Who uses it? Right now? Independent traders who operate in borderland space and are not particularly invested in network affiliation. 4 Kethari mining consortia. 2 Valori research vessels that found our navigational data service useful. 1 Sindari independent trader who came in 3 weeks ago looking skeptical and stayed for a week because our repair facility fixed a propulsion fault that 3 network stations had told him would take 4 months and a full diagnostic review. Yilmaz sipped his coffee. He's coming back next month with his cousin's ship. Dranith set her cup down carefully. The Council is concerned about unauthorized infrastructure in ungoverned space. The ungoverned space is ungoverned, Yilmaz said pleasantly. That's rather the point of calling it that. The Council's position is that the establishment of permanent human infrastructure outside of registered space represents a potential violation of. Consul, Yilmaz said, and his voice was still pleasant, but the word landed like a door closing gently but firmly in a draft. Humanity has been excluded from the Galactic Network. We accepted that exclusion. We are no longer network members. We are no longer operating under network treaties, network restrictions, or network territorial designations. He folded his hands on the table. The Council excluded us, believing that we would struggle in isolation. We are not struggling. We are building. And because we are no longer network members, we are building freely, quickly, and without the review process that your administration uses to slow the development of species it finds threatening. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was the silence of two people who both understood that something had fundamentally changed and were each, in their own way, deciding how to respond to that change. What do you want? Draneth asked finally. Yilmaz looked at her with an expression that contained, she thought, a great deal of patience. We want what we have always wanted, he said. To explore. To build. To trade. To help. We would very much prefer to do these things in a relationship of mutual respect with the civilizations of the Galactic Network. He paused. But we have learned, rather clearly, that waiting for your council's permission is not a workable strategy. He picked up his coffee again. So we stopped waiting. Draneth looked out the small window of the office at the docking ring beyond, at the human construction crews and their alien counterparts. She saw a Kethri worker moving alongside two humans on a scaffold, and at the fourth power ring going up against the stars. I will need to file a comprehensive report, she said. Of course, Yilmaz said. Coordinator Mensa will arrange full access to our public documentation. We have nothing to hide. He smiled. We never did. The pathogen designated KV-7 had been burning through the Veshan cluster for 11 weeks by the time the Galactic Network's medical authority issued its first formal response bulletin. This was not, by network standards, unusually slow. The medical authority's response protocols were thorough, exhaustive, and designed by a committee that had been constituted, revised, and rebalanced for representational equity across 31 species over the course of 2 centuries. The protocols were excellent. They took time. The Kethri population of the Veshan cluster's 3 inhabited bodies did not have time. Dr. Wanjiru Aching was 29 hours into a 90-hour diagnostic sprint when the message came in from Thornvale Station. She was working in the mobile medical unit that the Meridian Free Zone had deployed to the cluster 6 weeks ago. Not because anyone had asked them to, not because they had been cleared to do so by any authority, but because one of the Kethri mining consortia that traded at Thornvale had a partner operation in the cluster, and the partner had sent a message, and Dr. Aching's director had looked at the message and said, "Pack." She had packed. KV-7 was not like any pathogen she had studied in her training. It was not like any pathogen in the Galactic Network's medical database, which she had accessed through a borrowed channel before the network revoked their data exchange privileges. It was, as far as she could determine, an entirely novel organism, possibly natural in origin, possibly something else, and completely indifferent to every treatment approach she had tried in the first 3 weeks. In week 4 she stopped trying known approaches and started designing new ones. The message from Thornvale Station told her that the Galactic Network's formal medical response team was preparing to deploy. Estimated arrival, 3 weeks. Standard protocol. Full decontamination compliance. Pre-deployment assessment requirements. She read the message, set it aside, and went back to her microscopy array. 12 days later she had something. It was not elegant. It had been developed in a mobile unit in a converted cargo bay on a Kethri rock in the middle of a cluster that the network had never considered worth mapping in detail. It used a synthesis approach that she had derived from principles outlined in Dr. Marin Solis's Xenobiological Survey notes. Notes that had been filed in Earth's Independent Research Archive, never submitted for network review, never classified, never restricted, just filed and available for anyone who went looking. She called it the Aching Protocol because she was too tired to think of a better name. The first round of treatments went into 48 patients on the 23rd day of her sprint. She watched the results for 72 hours without sleeping. On the 4th day she slept for 6 hours, woke up and reviewed the data. It was working. Not perfectly. Not uniformly. But the pathogen's replication rate was dropping in 39 of the 48 cases, and in 12 cases the drop was dramatic. She adjusted the formulation twice, ran it through the second group, and on the 8th day she called her director at Thornvale with the preliminary results. The call was routed on the Meridian Free Zone's independent communication network, the one whose signal had first surprised Tyneth Vorel at her monitoring station several months earlier. It traveled through 3 relay points that did not exist in any Galactic Network chart and arrived at Thornvale Station in 7 minutes. Her director, A Ghanaian-Brazilian engineer named Marcus Filho, who had never expected to be running a medical response from a deep space transit hub, listened to her results and said, "How much can you produce?" "With current equipment, enough for approximately 300 patients per week," she said. "The cluster has an estimated 22,000 infected." "I will call Dr. Vasilenko," Filho said. "We have manufacturing capacity at Thornvale and at the Callisto facilities. If you can transmit the synthesis protocol." "Already sent," Aching said. 30 minutes ago. I figured you would ask." The Galactic Network's formal medical response team arrived in the Veshan cluster 19 days later. They were well-equipped, professionally staffed, and operating under a response protocol that had been refined and approved over 4 years of committee review. They found Dr. Wanjiru Aching, looking exhausted and professionally satisfied, coordinating a treatment distribution network that had already reached 11,000 patients. The infection rate had dropped by 63%. The Aching protocol was being manufactured at 3 facilities simultaneously and shipped on Meridian-free zone transport vessels that used routes the response team's navigator did not have on file. The lead physician of the network response team was a Valori named Thesirakal, distinguished and experienced and entirely unprepared for what she found. She stood in the mobile unit's central bay and looked at the data screens and the distribution maps and the synthesis logs, and she did not speak for quite a long time. "You developed this in 3 weeks, she said finally. 23 days, Aching said. "Give or take." The standard response protocol for a novel pathogen of this classification category requires 18 months of development and trial verification before deployment. "Yes," Aching said. "I read the protocols. You deployed without trial verification. I deployed with a preliminary data set of 48 patients and a statistical confidence level that I calculated was sufficient given the alternative," Aching said. "The alternative being that 22,000 people died while I waited for committee approval." The Sirakal looked at her for a long time. Valori expressed complex emotion through subtle color shifts in their facial tissue, and she was currently cycling through several shades that Aching's cultural training suggested indicated something between deep discomfort and profound reassessment. "Your protocol is effective," the Sirakal said finally. "I would like to understand how it works." Aching pulled up a chair. "Sit down," she said. "I'll walk you through it." 2 days later, the Sirakal transmitted a report to the network's medical authority that was, by several accounts, the most unusual document the authority had received in its 300-year history. It recommended the immediate incorporation of the Aching protocol into network response procedures. It recommended a formal review of human independent medical research archives. And it contained, in its final section, a personal note that was unusual for a medical report. The note read, in part, "I have spent 30 years in network medical response. I believe I have been practicing medicine the slow way. I would like to discuss this with Dr. Aching further, at her convenience." Dr. Aching, when informed of the note, smiled the kind of smile that the Kethari patients in Ward 3 had started calling the doctor's good news face. "Tell her I'm available next week," she said, "and that I have more protocols she should probably read." The hall had not been called Grand when it was built. It had been called Bay 7, converted from a secondary cargo processing space into a meeting room because Thornvale Station was growing faster than anyone had designed for and formal spaces had become necessary. Someone had put a long table in it. Someone else had added chairs from 4 different suppliers, which meant the chairs were 4 different heights and materials, and the beings who sat in them were obliged to accommodate each other's physical requirements in small practical ways before the talking even started. Director General Huang Liwei had always thought this was appropriate. She sat at the head of the table and looked at the assembled faces. Some were human. Station Director Emre Yilmaz, who had been running Thornvale's operations for 10 months and had the calm authority of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything. Dr. Marin Solis, whose paper maps had been framed and hung on the wall behind her, a decision she had protested on grounds of sentimentality and then admitted she was pleased by. Dr. Wanjiru Aching, who had come directly from the Veshan cluster and still had the focused eyes of someone recently emerged from a crisis. And some were not human. Trade Consul Siva Dranith, who had filed 6 reports on Thornvale Station and had been back 4 times since her first visit, each time with a slightly different expression that Huang had been tracking as a reliable index of the Sindari Council's evolving internal state. Dr. Thesirakal, who had brought 2 colleagues from the network's medical authority and was carrying a data tablet with Aching's protocols on it. A Kethari named Vorithson, representing the 4 mining consortia and bearing the particular dignity of someone who had been through a crisis and come out the other side with a clear view of who had been there when it counted. And Tyneth Vorel, the Valori monitoring observer, who had detected the first Meridian signal 8 months ago and had quietly transferred her posting request from any network station to Thornvale Station, 3 weeks after that, citing professional development interests. Huang had read her application herself and approved it personally. "Thank you all for being here," Huang said. "We called this meeting without a formal agenda because we thought an informal conversation would be more useful than a structured session. But I will say what I think most of us already understand for the sake of making it explicit." She looked around the table. The situation has changed. This was, as statements went, an understatement of considerable scale. Over the previous 10 months, the Meridian Free Zone's independent infrastructure had grown to encompass 7 permanent stations, 43 relay points, and a navigational service covering regions of space containing more stellar mass than the Galactic Network's registered territories. 3 independent research facilities were operational, 2 manufacturing hubs, 1 medical distribution network that had, in its brief existence, responded to 4 crises faster than any network authority had managed in comparable situations. And the Galactic Network was watching. "First Arbiter Dravict has transmitted a formal inquiry," said Ambassador Serafina Voss, who was present via communication link, her face calm on the screen at Huang's left hand. "He is requesting a meeting. He did not say what kind of meeting or what he hopes to achieve. I believe this reflects a genuine uncertainty on his part about the appropriate framing." "What does he want?" asked Consul Dranith. Voss paused carefully. "He wants to understand what we have become," she said. "He made a decision based on his understanding of what humanity was. That understanding was incomplete. He is now operating with a revised understanding that is still, I suspect, incomplete, but he is at least aware of the gap." Vorthson's stone-based voice filled a corner of the room. "The consortia have discussed this matter. Our position is simple. The humans helped us in the cluster when no one else did. They provided routes when we needed them. They are honest in their dealings. We do not require the network's permission to say this." The Cyricol set her tablet on the table. "The medical authority's formal position is that the Aching Protocol represents a significant advancement and that the review process for human independent research should be treated as high priority. Personally, I have read 47 of the documents in the Human Independent Archive over the past 6 weeks." She paused. "There are 9,212 documents in that archive." The silence that followed was the silence of people absorbing a large number. "They were not idle," Dranith said quietly, almost to herself. She had said something similar to Yilmaz when she first visited. She was saying it again, Huang noticed, with a different quality. The first time had been discovery. This time was something closer to genuine reckoning. "We were never idle," Dr. Solis said, with the gentle precision of someone who had spent 17 years mapping space that other people had declared not worth mapping. "We are not, as a species, constitutionally capable of being idle. The network's review processes were slow. We found this frustrating. Frustration in humans tends to produce more work, not less." Huang folded her hands. "So, Dravic wants a meeting. What do we say?" The question sat in the room. It was not a simple question because it was not really a question about logistics. It was a question about what humanity wanted now, what it was willing to offer and what it required in return, and whether the shape of the civilization it had been building in the dark spaces was one that could coexist with the civilization that had expelled it. Voss spoke from the screen. "I think we meet. I think we meet here at Thornvale on our terms and in our space. I think we show him what we have built and let that speak first before either of us says a word." "And if he comes with conditions?" Yilmaz asked. "We listen to them politely," Voss said. "And then we explain what our conditions are. Which is that we are not asking to be let back into a system that was never designed to accommodate us. We are offering the possibility of a new arrangement, one that reflects what we actually are rather than the diminished version the network's metrics described." Dranith looked at Huang. "What do you want the new arrangement to look like?" Huang looked at the faces around the table. At the mismatched chairs. At Solis's paper maps on the wall. At the view through the bay's single large viewport of the stars beyond Thornvale Station. Stars that the Galactic Network had never named, in a region of space that no registered civilization had thought worth visiting. "I want it to look like this room," she said. "Different species in chairs that don't quite match, working on problems together because the problems matter and the working together is better than the alternative." The quiet that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the quiet of a shared understanding settling into place, the way a new structure settles into its foundation not all at once but gradually, each part finding its relationship to the others. Outside Thornvale Station, in the ungoverned space that humanity had spent decades quietly learning to navigate, the Meridian Signal Network pulsed on at its steady rhythm, offering routes and safe passage to anyone who needed them, requiring nothing in return except the willingness to travel. It was not a declaration of independence. It was not a threat. It was an open hand. Extended, patient, unhurried. Humanity had always been better at offering than asking, Huang thought. The network had read this as a weakness. Looking at the table, at the beings from 4 species who had found their way here through routes the network did not control, she was very certain it was not. Emre Yilmaz poured more coffee for Dr. Aching and then, after a moment's consideration, poured a cup for Consul Dranith as well. She accepted it. She drank it. She had the expression of someone encountering something she had not expected to encounter, and finding, to her quiet surprise, that she was glad of it. Huang Liwei looked out at the stars and thought, we are only getting started. It was, as thoughts went, a very good one to have.